Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Now, I did one upload on this channel about Webster Tarpley, and that was called Webster Tarpley, Genius or Fraud, and of course I can't really get too far into a discussion about Webster until you're going to bring up Lyndon Larouche. So I thought we would kind of do one and kind of examine the career, the works, the thinking, and the thought processes that are all about Lyndon Larouche, the Larouche PAC, that's the Political Action Committee associated with his work. Now, somebody once left a comment on a forum that the true Lyndon Larouche is Webster Tarpley, that Tarpley is better than Larouche. I think that they're just two different people, for example. Webster Tarpley is somebody who's more associated with, of course, history, being his discipline, as well as point-by-point political commentary. Lyndon Larouche is somebody who is more about science, he is more about economics, and he is also even into things like music. He has like some very big opinions about things going on in the musical world. What I would say, though, about Lyndon LaRouche is that he is somebody who has covered an enormous amount of subjects and disciplines over his very long career. I believe he ran for president 8 times, once as in his own party, the U.S. Labor Party, back in 1976, and then the remaining times he ran for the Democratic nomination for president and was, of course, unsuccessful. But in 1986, I wanted to say, I hope I'm getting this right, I believe that the LaRouche movement had over 800 candidates running for office nationwide. I mean, we're talking about the state and local elections as well, if you count all of that. They had over 800 candidates running nationwide, and that's somewhat rather impressive. I mean, Webster Tarpley has never put up those type of numbers with the Tax Wall Street Party, his new group that was founded in 2014. So, what is the Lyndon LaRouche movement all about? Well, it really took a while for me to get into some of their stuff because, like they have so many videos online, and LaRouche has, a variety of things on. He has so much to say about a lot of issues. But one of the things that, really stood out to me that really gives some insight into Lyndon LaRouche and his movement is kind of, first of all, his views on Plato. I mean, he views Plato over Aristotle, actually saying that Aristotle is the root of all evil because Aristotle promoted material empiricism and just kind of just seeing the world the way it is, whereas Plato was all about metaphysics and states of being and just sort of being thoughtful and like, now, excuse me if I kind of misinterpret this, but like what I've sort of gathered from listening to some of LaRouche's speeches is that Aristotle wanted the political world to be the sort of arbitrating force in existence. Like he wanted problems to be solved through politics, and Aristotle wrote the Politics. But Plato was actually more about having problems solved through the human mind. This is coupled with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, another enormous influence on Lyndon LaRouche, who sort of says that, we live in the best of all possible worlds. If there is a problem, then the solution must also exist. So if there's any problem in the world, then there is a solution. You just have to find it. You just have to begin by thinking about it. Leibniz applies this to economics when he's like, the first step in economics is the idea. Now, I was listening to one of Lyndon LaRouche's speeches, what was it called? A Bridge from Hell to Purgatory. And yeah, that's a very big clickbait title from the Oakland LYM. That's the LaRouche Youth Movement. And he was saying something as well that I had never really heard before, but I think provided a little bit of insight into LaRouche and his thinking, when he was saying that God made man in his image. What does that actually mean? I mean, LaRouche views God as a creator, and man is also a creator. Man has the ability to create things. So it's like, that means, we can use anything in the world for man's own creation. Man can do whatever man wants with any natural resources. This is why LaRouche is so big on infrastructure projects and linking the world together with bridges and tunnels and any sort of thing that just links the world together. He wants a tunnel under the Bering Strait to link Eurasia and North America together by a single access point. He was a very big champion of the Zhuhai Hong Kong Macau Bridge in Southeast Asia. like he loves bridges and tunnels. Let's I can say that very much. But we've also talked about LaRouche on one of our uploads here about humans living on the moon. In the 1980s, LaRouche was talking about human beings need to create a space on the moon, sort of like a station that can be sort of a stopover point on the way to Mars, so that humans can, use kind of the moon as sort of an intermediary point in between Earth and Mars. It would be sort of a permanent lunar base. And, talking about lunar colonies and but like, what is the real thing with Lyndon Larouche? I mean, yes, we can talk about all day about these philosophical ideas, these are these scientific ideas that they've put out. But what really is the big deal with the movement? I mean, I once met somebody from the Lyndon Larouche movement who was trying to kind of recruit me into it, and what they were sort of asking me was to give money. But like, I just had one giant question: if Larouche is such a good thinker, and if these ideas are so good, why aren't they more well received by the general public, by the academic communities, by, well, anybody? I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The LaRouche movement has a small following compared to, say, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And why is the Lyndon LaRouche movement always called a political cult? Like, what on earth is going on with that? I mean, I definitely would say that they provided, some interesting interpretations. I mean, even about the things, that I don't necessarily agree with, like man has, full domain to just do whatever he wants with the planet Earth because man is a creator. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, but like it's sort of an eye-opening statement. It's definitely something that kind of makes you think a little bit. And what is all this stuff about, Lyndon LaRouche going to jail? What about Jeremiah Duggan? What about all of these kind of, controversies that are associated with the Lyndon LaRouche community, especially the political cult following? Why are they called a political cult, and why do they have, such poor support from the mainstream audiences? Well, what I would say is that I didn't really get a good answer from, the person I was talking to about that. But one of the things that I kind of noticed is I began to wonder, is Lyndon LaRouche kind of just putting out some far-out ideas? Like we talked about this in the Webster Tarpley upload, the concept of crafting delusional arguments so somebody can have their own brand of politics. That's been an allegation that's thrown at an enormous amount of people, that they don't genuinely believe what they're saying. They're just kind of putting out far-out ideas to appeal to people's certain emotional sense. The Green Party has even been accused of that, and, Jill Stein, and just like I was even talking about Jill Stein, so, plans for, this and that, and somebody was just like, those are wild ideas that they are just marketing to uneducated people that are never, ever going to come true. That's what somebody said to me. And, it's like, I try to keep a fairly open mind when it comes to listening to political ideas. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, no, no, no. You're just going to be completely closed. But I think that person responded in a bit of an extreme way, but at the same time, are people just saying things because they know it can get a certain reaction? Like, are people saying far-out ideas in the political world just to gain a following for the sake of gaining a following? Because that's what Lyndon LaRouche has been accused of a lot. And in an episode of Crossfire from the 1980s, the host Tom Braden told Webster Tarpley, "You're just playing off the fears of the general public just so you can mention the name Lyndon LaRouche more often." But like, what is the real motivation behind this? After listening to a lot of the videos up from Lyndon LaRouche and some of his supporters and people of his team like Jason Ross, who is a very good presenter, I've liked some of his things that he did on Leibniz, as well as Bertrand Russell, and he did some very nice presentations from Jason Ross online. But what I sort of gathered, that my sort of feeling about the Lyndon LaRouche movement is, they're just following LaRouche's ideas. I don't necessarily think that it is something fraudulent. It's just Lyndon LaRouche throws out any idea that comes to mind. And then his followers are just like, they're accepting this in sort of the way of Plato's philosopher king. Once again, we're not dealing with Aristotle and the politics. We're dealing with Plato and the philosopher king. He who has the best ideas, is going to be the leader. So they just accept that LaRouche has good ideas. So when LaRouche says, this about economics, he makes this economics forecast, people start following that. As well as, when he says something like, hey, we need a base on the moon so humans can use that as a gateway point into Mars or something like that, people will follow that too. And we need missile defense systems that are going to take out missiles coming to America using laser beams and stuff like that. Which, that's a real thing that they want, like the laser defense system. His followers go along with that as well. They're using his ideas. It's sort of just a different style of governance. Now, that would sort of mean that I guess I'm sort of trying to insinuate that I don't think Lyndon LaRouche is making up crap just to have a following. There are probably some people in the political world who are doing that, who are genuinely trying to deceive their followers. I don't really get that vibe from Lyndon LaRouche. What I rather think is that, he's just saying any single idea that comes to mind, whether it's valid or not. I mean, and his followers are going along with it because, well, they've accepted that he is their leader. The Lyndon LaRouche movement has a lot of controversial statements. They're completely anti-global warming. They are promoting the historical model that the British Empire never fell, it just reshaped. It's sort of just something about how empires don't actually fall, they just morph into different styles of, they just morph into different shapes, pretty much. And it's sort of like the Empire of Britain, the British Empire, actually comes from the Empire of Venice, which Rome was an empire of territory, right? The Roman Empire. Venice was an empire of financial controls, but they moved from Venice for various reasons to the island of Great Britain because you couldn't run the world from a swamp on the Adriatic Sea, quote Webster Tarpley. Now, what do we really make of that stuff? Because those are some very bold statements. And they also, Lyndon LaRouche also has the very big statement that the Queen of England is the biggest drug dealer in the world. And that has been really kind of blown out of proportion. A lot of people like to use that one to try and throw that as a smear campaign. LaRouche, by his own admission, never insinuated that the Queen of England is actually on the street dealing drugs. No, what he said was that she benefits from certain things that are affecting former territories of the British Empire, or sorry, I should say former colonies, now called territories of the British Empire, they benefit somewhat from the massive drug trade, and like one of the people who benefits is also the Queen of England. And I'm not really an expert on that aspect of the LaRouche platform, because to be honest, it does sound a little bit silly, and I think that there are much more fascinating and interesting things that LaRouche is talking about, such as Henry Kissinger never worked for the American government. Henry Kissinger worked for the British government. And they really just say that he is, ever since he was at Harvard, he was indoctrinated into a school of British-style thinking. And when Lyndon LaRouche uses the word British, it doesn't really refer to the island of Great Britain or the United Kingdom. What it refers to is the financial controls behind the former British Empire. Because what LaRouche is saying is that they never went away. What LaRouche is saying is that the financial powers, the economic powers behind the British Empire are still in existence. They actually come from Venice, and they've never really faded out. It's the same financial controls, the banking system. Sometimes he calls it the British system of political economy based on speculation, which means that the American people do not really have a good chance at affecting the economy, because if it's so speculative that it can just, go up and down without too much control, and you can't really approach it in a sort of Leibnizian manner where you need to find the solution, because this is so just kind of out of order, disorganized, something that isn't really going to be benefiting the American people. But is any of this true, though? I would say, though, that the Venetian conspiracy, which is promoted heavily by the LaRouche movement, is one of the big things. That's like kind of what I'm thinking the hardest when I ask that question. Why aren't these ideas more popular or more well received, or kind of where's the academic support behind this? I mean, there might be a few people talking about the Venetian conspiracies that the financial controls from the former province of Venice, or what's the exact word? The city-state of Venice, city-state, or have moved to the British Empire, and then that controls the entire world. But wouldn't more academics have come to that conclusion, spending hours in the archives, why aren't more academics coming to that conclusion and that in like coming to a kind of a consensus on those particular ideas? I've been most critical of the Larouchian historical theories because it's like these are things that people are really studying, and the other academics aren't coming to this conclusion. It's not about something such as saying that, hey, we need to have a base on the moon, we need a tunnel under the Bering Strait. Those things don't exist yet, and you can argue about why you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. No, but when you actually talk about what genuinely happened in history, there's a little bit less interpretation going on. It's still a fascinating statement all the same to hear the concept that the empires do not fall, they just morph into different variants of their old selves. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. That's still something to keep in mind, and it's like it could be something interesting to explore a little bit more. One thing I did notice about Lyndon Larouche is that he supports the Treaty of Westphalia 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War, as sort of a model for world peace. They put this out very frequently in the LaRouche Pack daily updates, which you can get on your sent to your email. And it's like I was very surprised to hear that because who else supports that? Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, LaRouche's arch nemesis, so he said in The Power of Reason, his autobiography. Henry Kissinger is for that exact same system. I mean, he wrote a book about it called World Order, which is like talking about how they should use the Treaty of Westphalia 1648 as a model for world peace. So it's like, first of all, you have, this guy who's saying, you're saying that Henry Kissinger is someone who is just kind of a shill for the British political and financial and economic systems that is destroying the planet Earth. And then he's actually using the same model, and they're both promoting the same model to kind of to keep the world in order. So it's like, what really is going on there? Does that mean that LaRouche, is once again just throwing out whatever idea comes to mind, regardless of where it comes from, and then his followers are just going along with that? I'd say that that's fairly possible, but only LaRouche truly knows about how much he believes what he says, or how much is kind of exaggerated or fabricated. They do have a very, very passionate stance against global warming, saying that global warming is a hoax. It was concocted by Prince Philip and Prince Bernard of the Netherlands. This was done, just to kind of promote the idea that people need to die for the earth. The Lyndon LaRouche movement is all about eugenics. That's when it starts to get weird, because I just don't know if those eugenics conspiracy theories are true. I mean, I really just don't know. A lot of what they're saying sounds very far out. It sounds well documented, but the thing that people kind of accuse the Lyndon LaRouche movement of is their things are very well argued, very well documented, but what they get accused of is cherry picking to get a desired result. And in the Webster Tarpley upload, we also talked about LaRouche as a personal friend of Roger Stone, who during the Nixon campaign promoted the sort of theories of outrageousness is what sells. You have to be outrageous or you'll never get noticed. Well, does LaRouche do that? I'd say to a fair amount, and Daniel Pipes even talked about this in his 1997 book Conspiracy, when he was like, when you want to become a certain type of conspiracy theorist, especially if you're appealing to Democrats, the way Lyndon LaRouche did, running first for the U.S. Labor Party and 7 times as a Democrat, you have to present yourself with an air of intellectualism. You have to present yourself as a sort of sophisticated intellectual. That is kind of how the left-wing conspiracy theories formulate. So says Daniel Pipes in one of his books, but Daniel Pipes is a guy who's kind of off the rails now, and I'm sorry for bringing up his name, but is that just what's it? Is this outrageousness, like to get attention? Is this just, making a lot of noise so people will hear what you have to say? I'd say that there's probably a high chance that that certainly could be present, but that doesn't mean LaRouche is a fraud. Is LaRouche a genius? I definitely think that he is someone who has some good ideas. I would say, though, that sometimes, though, when he's on television, he lacks the certain amount of finesse that Webster Tarpley has. I mean, he would always just, now, wait a minute, what's the name of that? Oh, what? Who was that person? He just he becomes a little bit scatterbrained when he gets kind of interrogated in interviews, but at the same time, I do think he has some very creative ideas about science. We talked about some of them already, as well as he has like a very bold statement now on the American system of political economy, which once again it's a very strong, passionate economic platform. Not to mention the four economic laws of Lyndon LaRouche: reinstate Glass-Steagall, nationalize the Federal Reserve / create a national bank, infrastructure projects to link the world together, and space exploration. Um, it is a school of thought, and it seems somewhat legitimate. But the thing is, though, it's more about submission before these ideas and accepting that these people have good ideas as opposed to arguing it out through discourse. But anyway, what do you think? Do you think Lyndon LaRouche fabricates any of his material? Do you think that he is a genuine believer in everything that he says? Does he intentionally become outrageous to try and get a bigger following? And are his ideas as good as they say they are? What do you think?